Has any of my viewers ever had any experience with foxes in the wild? I'll never forget my first encounter. One weekend in the dead silent middle of the night while ground tenting at the Pinery Provincial Park. I was awoken by this blood-curdling scream, getting louder and louder, closer and closer. What I initially thought was creeping death coming to disembowel me actually turned out to be a love-starved vixen. A fox vixen, that is. The reason I brought that up is because, well, on this very weekend, Lexi was about to experience her first very own fox encounter. As this trip was to be a sort of trial run for the new Bronco setup ahead of the big, week-long off-road adventure in July, I didn't want to venture too far or into unfamiliar territory. But as with most of my trips, it involves heading north up Highway 400. However, while inching along with the slow crawling traffic, it turned out the Barrie, Ontario Air Show was going on, and so me and my fellow frustrated commuters were treated to a little bit of a formation aerobatics display by the Canadian Snowbirds. Arriving to some crown land about an hour's north of Parry Sound, it was already getting late into the afternoon, having started out on this trip a little late in the day. This being a Friday, I was hoping a familiar and popular spot in the area was open for me and Lexi to set up, but as it turned out, once again, no dice. But as luck would have it, later on in the weekend, I would be relieved that these fellow Crownland campers were there, and so would Lexi. With what I thought was probably the prime real estate location in the area taken up, I still had some options. One of which was a small side trail where I once saw a diesel dually pickup truck haul a camper out of. Part of the off-road adventure is discovering new spots, so in we went, and I'm so glad we did. At the end of this trail was this beautiful clearing right on the same small lake as the spot I was hoping to get. I think this will do just fine. With this spot being so large and easily accessible, I was totally expecting visitors dropping in all weekend long, looking for their own place to set up. But apart from a single person using a nearby natural boat launch, we were undisturbed the whole weekend. With it now being about 7 o'clock in the evening, there was no time to waste in setting up. Well, except of course, enjoying a cold beverage. So far with the prototype roof rack set up on the modular roof of the Bronco all loaded up, I'm thankfully having zero issues so far. The real test will be the first week of July on our big adventure though. Every time I use the term big or epic in describing an adventure in one of my videos, I almost feel as if I'm setting myself up for disaster, being reminded of the Swisher Loop trip last year. Maybe from now on, I'll just refer to these adventures simply as trips or holidays. Have I mentioned how much I love my foothill rooftop tent? Sure, it's a bit of work to set up or take down, but no more than a ground tent, I suppose. Being up off the ground is the only way I'll camp now. As it was approaching dusk, the mosquitoes started to make their presence felt, and Lexi, being the pampered pooch that she is, took it upon herself to find some solace in the Bronco. Just a few more things to set up before we can finally relax and enjoy our little nature spot. Lexi, of course, being her typical helpful self. Unbelievable that we lucked out on this spot for the weekend. I almost wish I had a kayak or an inflatable pack raft or something just to get out on that beautiful water. By this time, Lexi was subtly letting me know that it was her supper time, so unlike her. So there we are, all set up apart from some minor chores. Time to sit down and relax and watch the sun go down. We ended up getting a nice, cooling breeze that evening, which definitely helped with the mosquitoes. When the wind eventually did die down, it was time to break out the trusty thermocell. After the busy week of prepping for and trying to get everything organized for this trip and the long drive north, it was finally time to turn in for the night. We woke up the next morning to yet another beautiful sunny day. Myself, I would have liked to have slept in a little bit longer, but Lexi apparently had all the rest she needed, and so she left me without any option than to get out of bed and fetch her breakfast. With the dog taken care of, it was time to brew that first cup of coffee. I don't know what it is about a hot coffee while outdoors camping. First thing in the morning, that makes it such an experience. Bacon, well, the same thing can be said about bacon while camping. There's nothing better. For this season, I decided to add a compact single burner isobutane stove setup to my gear to keep it in a new drawer in the back of the Bronco. You just never know when you'll need that next quick coffee fix. And when you're camping beside a quiet lake with that warm morning sun hitting you, everything else just suddenly feels that much less important. While taking the time to have a little stroll around the campsite with my coffee, I had noticed a clutch of turtle eggs had been raided. Scavengers, maybe raccoons, and then I happened upon more dug-up earth. Unfortunate, but I guess it's nature's way. Another departure this year from my previous travel seasons was transitioning from the 100-watt residential solar panel I had used to this 140-watt folding suitcase panel setup. While it is an offshore Amazon special, it was just the perfect size for stowing away under the fridge slide out, and it did come with a multitude of different means of connecting devices such as this barrel plug for charging my all-powers power bank. I love the fact that it displays both input and output powers and estimated battery capacity, and that I can max it out with all my rechargeable devices. With the morning chores taken care of, it was time to get some breakfast on the go. One of the reasons for going with my rear tailgate drawer setup that my friend Dino built me was to cleverly utilize more counter space with this cutting board insert. Super handy. With the fridge on one side and the stove on the other, it's actually a more efficient setup than the kitchen I have at home. In addition to the single burner stove, I also added this nifty compact folding pour over filter to my gear. It's definitely a quicker, cleaner way to brew a fresh coffee while camping. Part of doing a trial run with a newish camp setup, whether it be overlanding or backpacking, is refining your setup. And no matter how well prepared you are, something always gets left behind. For me, I never would imagine it would be cutlery. But here we are. You always make the best of what you have. This new drawer setup also comes in handy for doing dishes after a meal. This is true especially when you have a leashed up dog roaming around looking to tangle up with the legs of your typical table and the resulting calamity. With my power bank now fully charged up, it was time to plug into the Bronco and top up the auxiliary battery in it. I made this cable for connecting the panel to the charge controller, but in the near future, I plan on integrating a plug and a hard mount socket maybe at the rear bumper to simplify connecting the solar panel in. Having the second battery being monitored by Bluetooth definitely helps keep an eye on my energy levels, and the new solar panel seems to be working quite well. Before we set out on this weekender, I actually had an Amazon delivery drop off just before we left, so that got tossed in the Bronco and I now can finally tear into it. One item which was delivered, which I wish I had on my Swish-a-Loop trip, was a set of limb lifters. With my Bronco toolkit and the trail site accessory point, installation couldn't be easier. The upper mount point needed a bit of fab work though, as the roof rack was using the mounting studs meant for the cable bracket. My next mod, a set of $30 seat covers. But before installing these, I should have been a little more wary of leaving the doors open on the Bronco. This made a nice sun shelter for a swarm of opportunistic mosquitoes. With the thermocell taking care of the insects, I eventually slipped on the seat covers and well, you get what you pay for, I guess. I think I might just trim off the seat back covers just because they don't give me access to the seat back pockets. Because on my next trip I'll be traveling with a large group of rigs, we'll all be in contact with one another with radios. So with a spare backup radio and a cheap Amazon voice recorder.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2, check 1. Sibilance.
Okay, maybe not everyone will get the Spinal Tap reference, but anyway. While taking a small snack break, I kept on hearing unfamiliar bird calls, so I thought I'd break out the long lens and go for a walk. I wouldn't actually call myself a birder by any stretch of the definition, but they make for intriguing and challenging photo subjects. Here are a few new to me birds that I haven't photographed before. Every species with their own unique, beautiful song, unlike some other animals. After working up a bit of thirst chasing elusive birds around the field, it was time for a cold, refreshing beer. This bird call should sound familiar to my viewers. What I initially thought was a whippoorwill is actually a small bird called a eerie, one of my favorite sounds in the bush. Another bird that almost went unnoticed was this tiny, quiet little hummingbird. He was probably about the size of my thumb, and he'd just keep popping up on this very branch to keep an eye on me and Lexi. What was turning out to be the end of a beautiful, serene day was shattered by some random gunfire into the lake by a neighboring camp. Kinda reckless considering we weren't the only ones camped out there on this lake. When the shenanigans finally finished, it was time to catch up on some Isle of Man TT races, something I really didn't have time for up until this weekend. If you've never witnessed racing on public roads on a 60-kilometer long circuit with over 250 corners before, do yourself a favor. These guys are absolutely mental. With the day quickly drawing to a close, I decided we'd start a small fire and enjoy our last night on the lake. I mentioned on my Swish-a-Loop series that Lexi's behavior around water hinted at the fact that she'd never been swimming before. And her behavior this night, well, I don't think she's ever sat around a campfire before either. That poor dog. I did my best to try to coax her out from behind the Bronco, but she wasn't having any of it. A slightly more straightforward approach, which also failed, to have her come out. I figured she couldn't refuse my camp chair, but, well, she did. Maybe next time. I wanted to get some shots of the night sky this weekend, but the moonlight was kind of playing against it. That, and it was difficult trying to stay up late enough for the more ideal conditions, but this is what I managed from the tent. The following morning, it was time to pack up and get ready for the long drive home. As you can see, I have Lexi lashed to the Bronco like I always do. Of course, you'll remember that fox that I showed you at the beginning of this episode. As you can plainly see in this image, this guy was fully aware of our presence from across the lake from the night before. If there's one thing you can say about foxes, it's that they're pretty smart and cunning. And I'm pretty sure this fox has come to equate people in this area with food. Not everyone who visits here is clean or respectful, something others have noticed as well, and also quite evident with the amount of garbage laying around. So as I went about making my morning coffee like I always do, Mr. Fox decided this morning he'd maybe want to come and investigate our camp a little closer. I guess I must have unfortunately had the camera off while all this took place, but what happened next took place in a blink of an eye. While I was standing there stirring my coffee with my back turned to Lexi, I suddenly heard what sounded like a stampeding horse pounding across the ground. I spun around in time to glimpse Lexi at full trot, no barking, no noise, just full out running across the clearing. A split second later, she hit the end of her leash and it immediately snapped, but she hardly even missed a step. When I glanced up in the direction she was running, there, standing completely frozen, at least initially, at the edge of the camp clearing was this very same fox. He obviously wasn't going to stick around to say hello to Lexi, so off he went up the trail and straight into the woods. I gave chase up the trail and followed the rustling in the bush because by this time, Lexi was already long gone from sight. I kept whistling and calling out Lexi's name the whole time, only pausing to listen as the rustling sound grew fainter and fainter. With my old dog Jackson, who was bred for hunting, his instinct was to bark and howl the entire time while giving chase to game. With Lexi, not a single peep. Within minutes, I was standing there in dead silence. As luck would have it, that very occupied site I initially wanted when I arrived here at the beginning of the weekend heard me calling out for my dog, and before long, well, you can guess who come walking into their campsite, all amped up and exhausted. She apparently surrendered herself with what piece of leash that was still attached, and they kindly walked her back over to my area of the lake. Some of you may know that awful feeling that comes over you when a pet goes missing or is lost. Being where we were in the middle of the wilderness, it was hard not to imagine that Lexi just may be gone for good. What an animal. I guess lesson learned. Not all dogs bark, some just immediately give chase. I was totally surprised to see that Lexi broke her tie out. A length of 3/4 inch of nylon webbing.
No.
Maybe it was just
Lexi.
old or damaged.
Where did you go? What'd you do?
Thankfully, all ended well this time. With Lexi eventually acting like basically nothing happened at all, we set off and had our long, uneventful drive home.